breaking news coming in. The citizens of Oleshki in Kherson region are protesting against Russia after being pounded by airstrikes in the last couple of days.
And those are the visuals we've accessed that show how the civilians in the Kherson region have now taken to streets. The region that we're talking about here is the Oleshki area in Kherson region. Now remember, Kherson is a city that has already fallen to the Russian troops, but situation there shows it's still very intense when we talk about the Kherson region as well. Remember, similar protests have also broken out in Luhansk and Donetsk regions as well, and those are the two regions that have already been declared as independent nations as well. Still, there is a growing sense of resentment, frustration, anger among people, and similar sense of frustration we can see among the people in Kherson region as well, where many have now taken to streets to protest against the Russian troops.
Well, those updates coming in, those pictures also with the siege of Mariupol as one of the largest amphibious task force threatened Odessa to the west. So this is where mainly the sea point of view, where Russia wants to block entry into Ukraine there. But Major General Katot, sir, I really want to understand for you from a military point of view, sir, what exactly is the United States doing when it comes to sending additional troops to Romania, Poland, and even Germany? What exactly will these troops do? I mean, there was also an offer by Poland to send across a MiG-29 to Ukraine. That has also been rejected. So what exactly is the purpose of sending these troops, sir?
Very frankly, it does not matter how many troops the United States sends to the NATO countries, because Russia is not going to war with NATO unless NATO attacks them first. So to that extent, NATO has already made it very clear that they are not going to get involved in this battle. And if they are not going to get involved in this battle, then the Russians certainly are not going to get involved. I think it is simply a defensive step which the American President Biden has taken, just in case of things go wrong. But very frankly, from the military point of view, I think it is a meaningless gesture. It has got some psychological ramifications to simply tell the NATO allies that, okay, the US is with you. But the point is, Russia is not going to war with NATO. President Putin has made that clear time and time again. So unless, of course, NATO attacks first. And NATO has made it very clear that they're not going to get involved in the war in Ukraine. Now, regarding the question of fighter aircraft, from Romania, the question is, let us say that Romania or any of the NATO countries wish to send fighter aircraft to the Ukrainians. How are these aircraft going to reach Ukraine? That is the first point. So they cannot get them there because that airspace is dominated by the Russians. And if any of these aircraft try to fly over, they will be shot down. That is a legitimate target. So again, I think this is in my personal view, they're trying to deceive the Ukrainian public, I will say, to say that, listen, we'll do all of this. But on the ground, that type of military support cannot reach the Ukrainian people in the immediate future.
Thanks, sir, for getting us all those insights. We'll come back to you for more insights on the same. But slipping into a very short break for now, news breaks and more updates to continue on the other side as well. Air raid sirens go off in Irpin, Zhytomyr and Vasykliev. Is Russia closing in on Ukraine's capital city? Also, US moves additional anti-missile batteries to Poland.
right now. This area has been completely blocked and people are leaving the city.
आने वाले जो कुछ एरियाज हैं वहाँ पे धमाके हुए हैं जिसके कारण देखिए इस वक्त सब लोग रास्ते में आ चुके हैं.
The focus for the Russians right now is no longer the military bases. They are directly attacking civilians. When a country is ravaged by war, it essentially leads to the kind of displacement that you see right now. 2 such explosions that took place in the vicinity. Several such houses have been evacuated.
पहली मर्तबा युद्ध के क्षेत्र में सुखोई का इस्तेमाल करके ऐसी तबाही हुई है.
Welcome back as we continue to get you non-stop updates, especially from the ground zone there in the war zone there in Ukraine. The Russian media seems to be claiming that Ukraine air defense shot down a Romanian aircraft. Quickly, let me go across to Shavan Sen, who is joining us live at this point. Shavan, 14 days, we are told that the Russian troops are now closing in barely 20 kilometers from Kiev. The Ukrainian media seems to be suggesting that the Russians seem to be struggling when it comes to their occupation of all of Kiev city. What are you hearing on ground there? Over to you.
Well, Amita, just to the latest update. This morning, pretty much the situation remains the same in almost all. Let me just check with the audio. Okay, Amita, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Yeah. So just to continue with the latest update that has come in from the General Staff of the Armed Forces this morning around 6 o'clock, the situation in most of the occupied territories by the Russians remains pretty much the same. In Cherniv, to start with, in Sumy, the situation still remains the same. Now, what's important to point out here is that the focus today would essentially be on the humanitarian corridor. Whether at all the ceasefire, there would be any ceasefire violations which would be leading to the suspension of the evacuation. In fact, in Mariupol is what we're being told that the buses which were basically arranged by the Ukrainian government so that the evacuation can take place, that was suspended because shelling started taking place. And one of the big accusations that has been leveled by the Ukrainian government is that while announcements have been made by the Russians for a humanitarian corridor to exist so that the evacuation can take place, the moment the evacuation begins, they are saying that the shelling starts leading to some sort of a delay. But there are two very important points that I would like to make. These are rather interesting details that have been put out by the General Staff of the Armed Forces, where they are saying that in Cherniv region, now this is a region which has now been occupied by the Russians. The Ukrainians are alleging that the Russian troops, they are hiding arms and military equipment, that too among the residential buildings and in rural premises. Now, what would that mean is that in these very areas you have a complete infiltration of the Russian troops. Second, they are also making another important allegation at this stage, where they are saying that in Mykolaiv, where there's been an intense battle between both sides, there are Russian troops who have moved into the city in civilian clothes. Now, we do not know what could be the intention for that. The other thing that they are saying is that there have been massive losses on the part of the Russians. Now, just to put this into perspective in terms of what's really happening of the losses of life, the civilian casualties, the number this morning that has been projected by the United Nations is that 1,335. That's the civilian deaths that have taken place in the last 13 days. Which once again the United Nations is also underscoring that the number could be way more than what they are projecting at this point in time. Let's also take our viewers through what's happening just closer to Kiev, where the fight still happens around Irpin, the bridge that was broken down by the Ukrainian forces. But the images that have come into the newsrooms indicates that the Ukrainian army at this point in time is certainly helping the locals there to evacuate from that area. This is while the shelling still takes place in those areas. The movement of the Russian army, the question that you were asking, what happens in and around Kiev, or what happens to the the 60-mile convoy of armored vehicles? Now, there is a considerable slowdown as far as the Russian advancement is concerned. What could be the reason? One, they are saying there is a logistical issue that the Russian troops are facing just on the borders of Kiev. They do not have enough fuel, they do not have enough food supplies, and that is the reason why they're not being able to mobilize. But importantly, as something that we have focused on yesterday is the involvement of the private armies. The Russians have also brought in private armies. You have leaders or fighters who were brought in from Chechnya. In fact, some of the names that we were given, the details that have been put out by the Ukrainians at this point in time is that in specific areas you have had fighters who were brought in by the Russians, which would essentially mean that these are private armies that have been brought in primarily to mobilize the troops right now. What was missing on the ground as far as the Russians are concerned, that loophole is being filled up by the private army. How long perhaps would that take in order to reach Kiev? That is not known, because we have entered the 14th day, but they still haven't been able to capture Kiev. It's also important to point out that they have not been able to encircle Kyiv from all sides. They are trying to move in the directions that have been put out right now by the Ukrainians is that from the north and the northwest direction, the Russians are moving in from a place called Polissky and Volyn. These are the operational districts from where they're trying to move in. From the south direction, they're also saying that the defense forces are carrying out the cover for the Ukrainian national border and the sea coast. So all in all, if you really look at it, it's the northern side of Ukraine which is becoming the crucial key area. I'll also bring in my colleague Andre, who's been traveling right now just to get us the details. Andre has been closely tracking. Andre, just a question to you. Now, in terms of the latest bombings that have taken place, you've got some details as to the bombings that took place late last night. Take our viewers through what's the latest you're picking up.
As I know from the official sources, the latest bombing has taken place in Zhytomyr, in Malin, and other civilian areas near the Kyiv.
So that was Andre giving us the latest update as to where exactly in the last 24 hours the bombings have taken place. And let me tell you, the team is now headed to a place called Malin, as Andre was pointing out, where there have been civilian deaths that have been reported. And our focus primarily has been to cover almost all areas which have been affected because of the bombing that have taken place. So with Malin, this would be the 16th city that the entire team would be covering.
Right, Shravan, because we are looking at many claims and counterclaims that are also seems to be coming now. What exactly do you believe that has changed on ground? Because with the attack seemingly intensifying there, but the Russian forces have been unable to take on Kiev. But even so, they have Ukraine has also been accusing Kremlin of time and again violating their own ceasefire for the third consecutive day.
Well, it's expected that both sides will put up their counters, and that's exactly what is happening. If you take a look at the humanitarian corridor, the green corridor that both sides had agreed upon, but what's happening on the ground is that there is a considerable delay. That is primarily because shelling has been taking place. Now, if you take a look at what the Russians have been saying or what the Russian media has been reporting, they are saying that the shelling is actually taking place from the Ukrainian side. If you take a look at what the Ukrainian media is reporting at this point in time, they have put out specific details with the imagery of how buildings, residential buildings in Mariupol, they have been affected. There have been interviews that have been done of the bus drivers who have been arranged by the authorities here in Ukraine, where they are saying that they had to halt the entire convoy of buses that were arranged by the authorities. They had to stop at a particular place much before reaching Mariupol, and they were not in a position to carry out the evacuation, primarily because they believe that if they would have gone ahead, then one bigger problem would be that they would come under the shelling that was taking place in those areas. So the fact of the matter, at least on the ground, is that it is becoming, both the sides, they don't seem to be in a position to honor each other's commitments. And that's exactly what we are also witnessing, because in most places that you go to, at least in the northern side, we are seeing those areas are being bombarded. You are looking at places, civilian areas that have been bombarded in the last few days, and the focus is now entirely changing. It does not remain just precision missile strikes. You are looking at aerial bombardment that's taking place, which basically covers a larger area. The place that we went to yesterday, that was in Overuch, a 500-kilogram bomb was dropped. Looking at almost 7 bombs that have been dropped in the area, leading to about resulting in about 30 households being completely damaged. So what you are staring at right now on the 14th day is that on the one side there has been a major struggle for the Russians also, but remember there is a larger picture which is emerging today. Is that in the beginning of this invasion, you saw the kind of support that Ukraine was actually getting from the global community. World leaders were rallying behind President Zelensky. But President Zelensky at this point in time appears to be quite frustrated with the lack of help. The fact of the matter is that while Poland is saying that they're going to send their fighter jets to Germany, from Germany perhaps the United States could send those fighter jets to Ukraine, but that has been rejected by the United States. Taking a look at what's happening from NATO, or the assistance that NATO has provided, or the lack of assistance rather, they're saying that at least the illusion that that President Zelensky had about the help coming in from NATO seems to have been diminishing, and the fact of the matter is that you're looking at a situation where with each passing day, Ukraine finds itself in an isolated spot. Of course, there is a military aid, and there is a lot more talk about the fact that the European Union is coming together to help Ukraine. But on the ground, remember, what is required right now is immediate help in terms of machinery, in terms of equipment that the Ukrainian army would need. The air defense happens to be one of the biggest challenges. That is exactly what I've been reporting right from day one, insisting on the fact that if there is one big lacuna in this entire war that has been waged, and one weak area of the Ukrainians have certainly been the air defense. And that is the reason why you're looking at once with Belarus siding with Russia, it becomes far more easier for the Russian troops to carry out such attacks, especially in the bordering areas, something that the Ukrainians had already suspected. If you remember, just about 2 to 3 days ago, there was an official update that came in from the Ukrainian side in which they had said that they were suspecting that Belarus could side with Russia and armed provocations could take place along the border. And that's exactly what we witnessed exactly 2 days later when we went to the bordering areas. Overuch happens to be a place which is barely 30 kilometers from Belarus. And of course, you saw the kind of destruction that took place. Government buildings were attacked, military bases have already been attacked, and now civilian areas are being attacked. So clearly at this stage, while there is a talk about the fact that the West is coming together. You've the United States is talking about a ban on import of oil. But is that really having some sort of an immediate result? It doesn't really look like. And on the other side, the Russians seem to be unfettered by the kind of sanctions that have already been imposed. You're looking at global brands now pulling out of Russia. But does that really have some sort of an impact? It doesn't look like. Who's really benefiting from the war? It does certainly appear that bigger companies back in the West seem to be directly benefiting from this war that is being waged. And who's perhaps the biggest I would say the biggest loss that one is facing is Ukraine. At the end of the day, they've lost a lot of civilians. They're looking at their infrastructure being completely demolished by the Russians. Of course, when it comes to the spirit of Ukrainians, that still remains very high. That is one area that I would say that the Ukrainians have stood up with their army. The Ukrainians have stood up with the government, and that is the reason why, if at all they have been able to somehow push back the Russian troops, the mighty Russian troops, that is only because of the kind of spirit that they've had and the fact that they believe that this is a war that they need to win.
Stay safe, Shravan. We'll keep coming back to you for all the latest updates.